The gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder, shattering the peaceful Montana twilight as Bethany James slammed the door of her cabin shut and pressed her back against it, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. The year was 1885, and in that terrible moment, everything she loved was at risk. "Mama," her 6-year-old son Samuel cried from the corner where he'd been playing with his wooden horses. His blue eyes, so like his father's, were wide with fear. "Hush now, darling," Bethany whispered, her trembling fingers fumbling with the lock. Outside, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. "Under the bed, Samuel. Quick as you can." The boy scurried beneath the small bed in the corner of their one-room cabin just as heavy boots thumped onto the porch. "Mrs. James," a rough voice called. "Open up. We know you're in there." Bethany grabbed her husband's shotgun from above the fireplace. Thomas had taught her to shoot before the consumption took him last winter, leaving her alone with their son and 20 acres of struggling farmland at the edge of Wolf Creek. "I've got a gun," she called, her voice steadier than her hands. "And I know how to use it." A laugh, cruel and cold, came through the door. "The Blackwell gang ain't afraid of no widow woman with a shotgun. Open up or we'll burn this place to the ground." The Blackwell gang. Everyone in Wolf Creek knew of them ruthless outlaws who'd been terrorizing the Montana Territory for months. Bethany had heard Sheriff Miller saying just last week that they were suspected of robbing the Billings stagecoach, killing the driver and 2 passengers. "What do you want?" she demanded. "Your husband owed us money, Mrs. James. And now we've come to collect." "Thomas owed you nothing." Bethany's voice shook with anger. "He was an honest man. Honest men still gamble, madam. And your husband lost big before he died. $500, to be exact." Bethany's blood ran cold. It couldn't be true. Thomas would never have gambled away money they didn't have. But even if he had, there was no way she could pay such a sum. The farm barely provided enough to feed her and Samuel. "I have $20, she offered desperately. "Take it and go." Another laugh. "That won't cut it, widow. But we heard you got something else that might interest our boss." "There's nothing." The door splintered inward with a crash, the lock giving way under a powerful kick. Bethany raised the shotgun, but before she could pull the trigger, a bullet grazed her arm. She cried out in pain, the gun clattering to the floor. 3 men stood in her doorway, their faces partially concealed by bandanas. The tallest one stepped forward, spurs jingling with each boot step on the wooden floor. "I hear you're mighty fine with herbs and such," he said. "Our boss got himself shot up pretty bad. He needs someone with healing hands." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Bethany said, pressing her hand against her bleeding arm. The man shrugged. "Figured you'd say that." He nodded to one of his companions. "Get the boy." Horror flooded through her as the second man strode toward the bed. "No." Bethany lunged forward, but the leader caught her around the waist. "Mama," Samuel screamed as he was dragged out from his hiding place. "Please," Bethany sobbed, struggling against her captor. "He's just a child. Take me instead." "That's the plan, Mrs. James. You come tend to our boss, and when he's better, you get your boy back. And if I refuse?" The outlaw smiled coldly. "Then your boy comes with us anyway, and you never see him again." "Mama," Samuel cried, reaching for her as the second man carried him toward the door. "I'll come for you, Samuel," Bethany promised, tears streaming down her face. "I swear I will." "You've got 2 days to show up at the old Peterson mine," the leader informed her, releasing her so suddenly that she stumbled. "Come alone. And if you bring the law, the boy dies." In moments, they were gone, the thundering of hooves fading into the distance as Bethany collapsed to the floor, her son's terrified screams still ringing in her ears. For several minutes, she couldn't move, paralyzed by shock and despair. Then, gradually, determination began to replace the fear. She would go to the Peterson mine as instructed but not alone, and certainly not unarmed. With shaking hands, Bethany bandaged her arm. The wound wasn't deep, but it stung fiercely. Night had fallen completely by the time she saddled her mare and rode toward town, her heart as heavy as lead. Wolf Creek was small, just a cluster of buildings surrounded by scattered homesteads, but it had a sheriff. Not that Sheriff Miller would be much help against the Blackwell gang. No, she needed someone else. Someone who knew the territory. Someone who wasn't afraid of outlaws. She needed Ryan Xavier. The lights of the Silver Dollar Saloon blazed into the night as Bethany dismounted, ignoring the curious looks from men loitering on the boardwalk. Women, especially respectable widows, didn't frequent saloons in Wolf Creek, but tonight Bethany couldn't care less about propriety. Her son's life was at stake. She pushed through the swinging doors, the cacophony of piano music, raucous laughter, and clinking glasses assaulting her ears. The smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke made her eyes water as she scanned the crowded room. And there he was at a corner table, playing cards with 3 other men. Ryan Xavier, the most skilled tracker and horseman in the territory. A former cavalry scout who now made his living breaking horses, guiding hunting parties, and occasionally bringing in bounties. He wasn't a lawman, but he knew the ways of outlaws better than most. He was also the most frustrating man Bethany had ever met. Arrogant, cocky, with a smile that suggested he found the world endlessly amusing and slightly absurd. When Thomas was alive, Ryan had often stopped by their farm, ostensibly to trade horses, but really, Bethany suspected, to provoke her with his teasing remarks and challenging gaze. She hadn't seen him since Thomas's funeral, where he had stood silently at the back of the small gathering, hat in hand, those intense gray eyes watching her with an expression she couldn't or wouldn't interpret. Taking a deep breath, Bethany straightened her shoulders and marched toward his table, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her. Ryan looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by his usual sardonic half-smile. But when he noticed her bandaged arm and tear-stained face, the smile vanished. "Mrs. James," he said, rising to his feet. "Is everything all right? I need to speak with you," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Privately." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Gentlemen, I believe I'll fold for the night," he told his companions, scooping his winnings into his pocket. As he led her to a quieter corner of the saloon, Bethany was acutely conscious of his tall, lean frame beside her. His dark hair was a bit too long, curling at the nape of his neck, and his face was tanned from long days in the saddle. At 32, Ryan Xavier was in his prime, strong, confident, and completely self-assured. "What's happened?" he asked once they were seated at a small table, relatively secluded from the main floor. The concern in his voice nearly broke her composure. Bethany swallowed hard, fighting back fresh tears. "The Blackwell gang," she began, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "They took Samuel." Ryan's expression darkened. "When?" "An hour ago. They burst into our cabin. Said Thomas owed them gambling money." "Thomas wasn't a gambling man," Ryan said with certainty. "No, he wasn't. But they took Samuel anyway." Her voice broke. "They want me to come to the old Peterson mine in 2 days to tend to their boss. They say he's been shot. And if you bring the sheriff, they'll kill the boy," Ryan finished, his mouth set in a grim line. Bethany nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. "Will you help me, Mr. Xavier?" "I can pay you," he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I don't want your money, Mrs. James. I'll help you because it's Samuel, and because—" He stopped abruptly. "Because what?" she pressed. Ryan looked away. "Because it's the right thing to do." He stood up. "We should talk to Sheriff Miller anyway. Not to bring him along, but to let him know what's happening." "You think he can help?" "I think he should be aware that the Blackwell gang is in his jurisdiction. Besides, we need to know what we're dealing with. The sheriff might have information about them that could be useful." As they left the saloon, Bethany felt her first glimmer of hope. Ryan Xavier was a man of action, not words. If anyone could help her get Samuel back, it was him. The sheriff's office was a small building next to the jail, lit by a single lantern that cast shadows across the weathered sign. Inside, Sheriff Miller was dozing at his desk, his gray-streaked mustache twitching as he snored softly. Ryan cleared his throat loudly, and the sheriff jerked awake, hand automatically reaching for his gun. "Easy, Sheriff," Ryan said. "It's just us." Sheriff Miller blinked, adjusting his spectacles as he peered at them. "Mrs. James? What in tarnation are you doing here at this hour? And with him, no less." He shot a disapproving glance at Ryan. Quickly, Bethany explained the situation. As she spoke, the sheriff's ruddy face grew increasingly grave. "The Blackwell gang," he said when she had finished. "Nasty bunch. Led by brothers, Jeremiah and Joshua Blackwell. They've been causing trouble from Wyoming to Montana for the past 3 years. What do you know about them?" Ryan asked, leaning against the wall, his posture casual, but his eyes alert. "Jeremiah's the brains, Joshua's the muscle. They've got maybe a dozen men riding with them. Word is Jeremiah took a bullet during their last job, a bank robbery over in Helena. That would explain why they want Mrs. James. Do you know where they're holed up?" Ryan pressed. The sheriff shook his head. "If I did, I'd have gone after them already. The Peterson mine is just a meeting point. They won't keep the boy there." He looked at Bethany with genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Mrs. James, but I can't risk a posse. Not with your boy's life at stake." "I understand," Bethany said quietly. "We'll handle it ourselves." "We?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You and Xavier?" Ryan straightened up. "That's right. I'm going to track them, find where they're keeping the boy, and bring him home." Sheriff Miller snorted. "Just like that? The Blackwell gang isn't a bunch of drunken cowboys, Xavier. They're killers. Cold-blooded and ruthless." "I'm aware," Ryan said coolly. "But they're also men. Men make mistakes. And when they do, I'll be there." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I can't officially sanction this, but—" He pulled open a drawer and took out a deputy's badge. "If you're wearing this, at least you'll have some authority." Ryan hesitated, then took the badge, tucking it into his pocket without pinning it on. "Thanks. Now, is there anything else you can tell us about the Blackwell brothers? Habits? Weaknesses? Anything that might help?" "Jeremiah's fond of gambling, but you know that already. Joshua's got a temper flies into rages. They're loyal to each other, but not necessarily to their men. And they've got a peculiar sense of honor. They keep their word, strange as that sounds." "That might work in our favor," Ryan mused. "One more thing," Sheriff Miller added. "There's a woman who rides with them sometimes. Calls herself Red Rose. She's Jeremiah's woman, by all accounts. Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as deadly." As they left the sheriff's office, Ryan turned to Bethany. "Go home and pack what you need. Medicine, bandages, whatever you'd use to treat a gunshot wound. I'll meet you at your cabin at first light." "I'm coming with you to find Samuel," she insisted. "No, you're not. You're going to the mine as instructed. I'll track the outlaws from your cabin, find where they're keeping Samuel, and bring him back before you even have to set eyes on Jeremiah Blackwell." "That's too dangerous. What if you're caught?" "What if, Mrs. James?" Ryan interrupted firmly. "I've been tracking men across this territory since before you arrived in Wolf Creek. This is what I do." "And if you fail?" she challenged, fear making her voice sharp. "If you're killed, what happens to my son then?" Something flickered in Ryan's eyes, anger, perhaps, or wounded pride. "I won't fail." "You can't promise that." "No," he conceded after a moment. "I can't. But I can promise I'll die trying if need be. Samuel is." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He's a good boy. He deserves to grow up with his mother." The simple statement, delivered in Ryan's usual matter-of-fact tone, nearly undid her. Bethany blinked back tears and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when your boy is home safe." As promised, Ryan arrived at Bethany's cabin just as the first pale light of dawn was breaking over the eastern hills. He came quietly, his dun stallions' hooves muffled in the dewy grass, but Bethany was already waiting on the porch, her medical supplies packed and her mare saddled. She hadn't slept at all, spending the night alternatively praying for Samuel's safety and preparing for the journey ahead. The cabin felt hollow without her son's presence, no scattered toys on the floor, no small voice asking endless questions, no warm little body to tuck into bed at night. Ryan dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. He was dressed for hard-riding sturdy boots, denim trousers, a chambray shirt under a leather vest, and a well-worn Stetson pulled low over his forehead. A Winchester rifle was secured to his saddle, and Bethany could see the bulge of a revolver beneath his vest. "You ready?" he asked without preamble. Bethany nodded. "I've packed everything I might need to treat a gunshot wound. And some food for the journey." "Good." Ryan approached the porch, his eyes scanning the ground. "Show me exactly where they stood when they took Samuel." Bethany led him inside the cabin, pointing out where each man had been. Ryan examined the floor carefully, then went outside to study the hoof prints in the dirt. "3 horses," he murmured, crouching to examine a particular print. "One's carrying extra weight that would be Samuel. The horse is favoring its right foreleg slightly. That'll make it easier to track." He straightened up. They headed southwest, toward the Peterson mine, but I doubt that's where they're keeping Samuel. My guess is they've got a hideout somewhere in the foothills of the Bitterroots. "That's a lot of territory," Bethany said, her heart sinking. "Yes, but they'll leave signs. Men always do." Ryan checked his watch. "It's about a day's ride to the Peterson mine, following the main trail. I'm going to take a more circuitous route, tracking these horses. With luck, I'll find their camp before nightfall." "And then what?" "Then I scout the situation and figure out the best way to get Samuel out." "Alone? Against a dozen armed men?" Ryan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I work better alone, Mrs. James. Besides, the best way to handle this kind of situation is stealth, not force. Get in, get the boy, get out before they even know what happened. And if they catch you, they won't." His confidence should have been reassuring, but Bethany couldn't shake the dread that had settled in her stomach since Samuel was taken. "What do I do when I reach the mine?" "Jeremiah Blackwell will be expecting me to treat his wound." "And you will," Ryan said. "Buy me time. The longer you can keep him talking and occupied, the better chance I have of finding Samuel. But be careful. Don't antagonize him, and don't let on that you've got help." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "If all goes well, I'll have Samuel back to you before you ever have to leave the mine. If not, play along with whatever they demand. Your safety and Samuel's are what matter." Bethany nodded, throat tight with unshed tears. "Please bring him back, Mr. Xavier." Ryan's expression softened unexpectedly. "I will, Mrs. James. You have my word." With that, he mounted his horse and began following the Outlaws' trail, riding parallel to it rather than directly on it, a precaution, Bethany assumed, in case any of the gang members were watching their back trail. She waited until he disappeared over the rise, then mounted her own horse and began the journey to the Peterson mine, fear and hope warring in her heart. The Peterson mine had been abandoned for nearly a decade, ever since the silver vein ran dry and the miners moved on to more promising claims. It sat in a narrow canyon, the weathered buildings clustered at the base of a steep cliff. As Bethany approached, the sun was starting its descent behind the western mountains, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. She had ridden hard all day, stopping only to rest her mare and eat a quick meal. Her arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, and exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden. But none of that mattered. Only Samuel mattered now. Pausing at the canyon entrance, Bethany took a deep breath to steady her nerves. Then she urged her horse forward, the mare's hooves clattering on the rocky ground. As she neared the main building, once the mine office, now a dilapidated structure with boarded windows, a man stepped out, rifle in hand. It was one of the outlaws who had taken Samuel, the tall one who had spoken to her. "Right on time, Mrs. James," he called. "Dismount slowly, and keep your hands where I can see them." Bethany complied, heart pounding. "Where's my son?" "Safe enough. Follow me." He led her into the building, where the air was stale and dust motes danced in the shafts of evening light that penetrated through cracks in the boarded windows. In what had once been the mine manager's office, a man lay on a makeshift bed of blankets spread over an old desk. Jeremiah Blackwell was younger than Bethany had expected, perhaps 35, with a thin face and piercing blue eyes that assessed her coolly as she entered. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, the cloth stained with dried blood. "So you're the healer," he said, his voice surprisingly cultured for an outlaw. "I must say, you're prettier than I was led to believe." Bethany ignored the comment. "I've come as you demanded. Where is my son?" Jeremiah smiled thinly. "Not here, as I'm sure you've guessed. He's with my brother at our camp. You'll see him when I'm well enough to travel if your healing skills are as good as I've heard." Bethany set down her bag of supplies. "I need clean water and fresh bandages." "Lyle," Jeremiah nodded to the tall outlaw. "Get the lady what she needs." When Lyle had left, Jeremiah studied Bethany with unnerving intensity. "Your husband was a fool, you know. Betting money he didn't have." "My husband never gambled," Bethany said firmly, unpacking her supplies. "Whatever story you've concocted, it's a lie." Jeremiah laughed, then winced as the movement jarred his shoulder. "You're right, of course. Thomas James was an honest man. Too honest for his own good." Bethany froze. "You knew my husband?" "Not personally. But I make it my business to know about everyone in the territories where I operate." "Knowledge is power, Mrs. James." Lyle returned with a bucket of water and some reasonably clean cloths. Bethany set to work, carefully removing the old bandage from Jeremiah's shoulder. The wound was ugly, an entry hole just below his collarbone, surrounded by angry red flesh. "The bullet's still in there," she said after examining it. "It needs to come out. Can you do it?" "Yes, but it will be painful. And there's risk of infection." Jeremiah shrugged his good shoulder. "I'm already at risk of infection with a bullet festering inside me. Do what you must." Bethany cleaned the area as best she could, then prepared her instruments, a slim knife, sterilized in the flame of a lamp, and long tweezers. She also mixed a strong sedative from herbs in her supplies. "Drink this," she instructed, handing Jeremiah a cup of the bitter liquid. "It will dull the pain." He eyed it suspiciously. "How do I know it's not poison? If I wanted to kill you, I'd let the infection do it. That would be slower and more painful." Jeremiah laughed again, genuinely amused this time. "You've got spirit, Mrs. James. I like that." He drank the sedative, grimacing at the taste. While she waited for it to take effect, Bethany probed gently around the wound. How did this happen?" "A bank teller in Helena got lucky. Or I got careless. Depends on how you look at it." "And the teller?" "Dead," Jeremiah said flatly, along with the bank manager and a customer who tried to be a hero. Bethany's stomach clenched at the casual way he spoke of killing, but she kept her expression neutral. She needed to keep him talking, buy time for Ryan to find Samuel. "Why did you choose me?" she asked. "Surely there are doctors closer to Helena. Doctors ask questions and report to the law. Widows who need their children back don't." The sedative was clearly taking effect. Jeremiah's speech had grown slightly slurred. "Besides, I've heard you have a gift. That you learned healing from a Crow woman." Bethany nodded. Running deer. She helped deliver Samuel when the doctor couldn't get to us in time. After that, she taught me about herbs and healing. Useful skills for frontier women. Jeremiah's eyelids were growing heavy, especially one on her own. Bethany waited until the outlaw was thoroughly sedated, then began the delicate process of extracting the bullet. It was difficult, painstaking work, requiring all her concentration. By the time she finally felt the tweezers grip the lead ball and carefully withdrew it, her back ached and her hands were cramped. After cleaning the wound thoroughly with an herbal antiseptic, she stitched it closed and applied a fresh bandage. Jeremiah had remained unconscious throughout, his breathing steady. "Will he live?" Lal asked from the doorway, where he had been watching the procedure. "If infection doesn't set in, yes." The bullet didn't hit any major blood vessels or the lung. He was lucky. "Lucky," Lyle snorted. "Boss makes his own luck, madam. He'll need to rest. No riding for at least 3 days, preferably a week." That's not going to sit well with him. It's that or risk the wound reopening. And next time, he might not be so lucky. Lal considered this, then nodded. "I'll tell the others we're staying put for a few days. You'll be staying too, of course." "I want to see my son," Bethany insisted, packing away her supplies. "You promised." "When the boss wakes up, you can discuss it with him. Until then, you'll stay here where we can keep an eye on you." Lyle led her to a small room adjacent to the office, formerly a storage closet with a narrow cot squeezed into it. "Get some rest, Mrs. James. You look about ready to drop." Once alone, Bethany sank onto the cot, her body trembling with exhaustion and delayed fear. She had done as Ryan asked, treated Jeremiah's wound, and bought time. Now all she could do was wait and hope that somewhere in the gathering darkness, Ryan Xavier was riding toward her son. Miles away, Ryan crouched on a rocky outcrop, studying the outlaw camp through his spyglass. It had taken him all day to track the gang's movements, following subtle signs that most men would miss: a broken twig here, a horse dropping there, the faint impression of hooves on rocky ground. The trail had led him deep into the Bitterroot foothills, to a hidden valley sheltered by steep slopes on 3 sides. It was an ideal hideout, easily defensible, with good visibility of the surrounding terrain, and a small stream providing fresh water. The camp itself was well established, with several tents and a crude lean-to shelter built against a rock face. A campfire burned in the center, around which 5 men sat drinking and playing cards. 2 more men stood guard at the valley entrance. But where was Samuel? Ryan shifted position slightly, adjusting the focus of his spyglass. There the lean-to. A small figure sat inside, knees drawn up to his chest. Samuel James, looking scared but unharmed from what Ryan could see. A stocky man with a shock of red hair sat nearby, clearly guarding the boy. Joshua Blackwell, Ryan guessed, based on the sheriff's description. And beside him, a woman with fiery auburn hair pulled into a long braid. Red Rose, most likely. Ryan counted again. 7 outlaws in total, plus the woman. Bad odds for a frontal assault, even if he'd been inclined toward such recklessness. No, this would require stealth and timing. He settled back to watch, waiting for night to deepen. The outlaws continued their card game, passing a bottle between them. Gradually, they began to retire to their tents until only Joshua, Red Rose, and 1 guard remained awake. Perfect. Ryan made his way down from the outcrop, moving as silently as the mountain lions that prowled these hills. He approached the camp from the steepest side of the valley, where the rocks provided both cover and access. No one would expect an approach from that direction. The guard at the valley entrance was half asleep, his chin nodding toward his chest. Ryan slipped past him like a shadow, keeping to the deeper darkness beneath the pine trees that dotted the valley floor. As he neared the camp, he could hear Joshua and Red Rose arguing in low voices. "Jeremiah said we'd move on once he had the healer," the the woman was saying. "I don't like sitting in one place this long." "Jeremiah ain't here, is he?" Joshua retorted. "I'm in charge until he gets back, and I say we stay put." "And the boy? What if someone comes looking for him?" "Who's going to come? That widow woman? The sheriff of that two-bit town." Joshua laughed harshly. "Once Jeremiah's patched up, we'll take the woman and the boy with us. She's pretty enough and useful besides. The boy could grow into the life. And if they don't want to grow into the life?" Red Rose challenged. Joshua shrugged. "Then they'll die. Simple as that." Ryan's hand tightened on his knife. He'd never killed a man in cold blood, but in that moment, he was sorely tempted. Pushing the thought aside, he crept closer to the lean-to. Samuel was still awake, his small face pale in the dying firelight. Ryan needed a distraction, something to draw the attention of Joshua and Red Rose away from the boy. His opportunity came when Joshua rose to his feet, stretching. "I'm turning in. Keep an eye on the kid." "I always do," Red Rose said sourly. As Joshua walked toward the largest tent, Ryan picked up a stone and hurled it toward the opposite side of the camp. It struck a metal pot hanging outside one of the tents, creating a loud clang. "What was that?" Red Rose stood, hand going to the pistol at her hip. Joshua turned, frowning. "Probably a raccoon or something. Check it out." Red Rose hesitated, glancing at Samuel. "Go on," Joshua urged. "I'll watch the boy." As Red Rose moved cautiously toward the sound, Ryan circled around behind the lean-to. Samuel was now alone, Joshua having moved several paces away to speak with the returning guard, who had been alerted by the noise. Ryan whispered from the darkness, "Samuel, don't make a sound." The boy's head jerked up, eyes wide with fear and then hope. "Mr. Xavier."
"Sure.
"I'm going to get you out of here, but you have to be very quiet."
Can you do that?"
Samuel nodded solemnly. "Good boy. When I count to 3, I want you to crawl out the back of the shelter, very slowly. I'll be right there. 1, 2, 3. Samuel began to wiggle backward out of the lean-to. Ryan reached out, grasping the boy's shoulders and pulling him into the shadows just as Red Rose returned to the fire. "Nothing there," she reported. "Must have been an animal."
"See?"
"Told you," Joshua said. "Now get back to watching." He broke off, staring at the now empty lean-to.
"The boy."
"He's gone." Ryan didn't wait for more. Lifting Samuel into his arms, he sprinted for the trees, using the sudden commotion in the camp as cover. Behind him, Joshua was bellowing orders, and Red Rose's shrill voice rose above the chaos. "He can't have gone far. Spread out and find him." Lanterns flared to life as the outlaws emerged from their tents, grabbing weapons and fanning out across the camp. Ryan ran harder, Samuel clutching tightly to his neck, the boy's heart beating like a frightened bird's against his chest. They reached the tree line just as a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark inches from Ryan's head. He ducked lower, weaving between the pines, putting as much distance as possible between them and the pursuing outlaws. "My horse is hidden about a quarter-mile up this slope," Ryan whispered to Samuel. "Can you hold on tight while I climb?" "Yes, sir," Samuel whispered back, his voice trembling but determined. "That's my brave boy," Ryan said, shifting Samuel to his back. "Arms around my neck, legs around my waist. Like riding piggyback." Samuel complied, and Ryan began to scale the rocky slope, grateful for the near full moon that provided enough light to see by. Below, the shouts of the outlaws grew fainter as they searched in the wrong direction. Finally, they reached the small plateau where Ryan had tethered his stallion. The dun nickered softly in greeting as they approached. "Hello, Thunder," Samuel said, his voice still barely above a whisper. Ryan smiled despite the urgency of their situation. Samuel had always loved his horse, often bringing it carrots and apples when Ryan visited the James farm. "He's happy to see you too," Ryan said, lifting the boy onto the saddle before mounting behind him. "Now, let's get you back to your mother." They rode hard through the night, Ryan choosing their route carefully to avoid leaving an obvious trail. Samuel, exhausted from his ordeal, eventually fell asleep against Ryan's chest, secured by one strong arm while the other held the reins. Ryan couldn't help the surge of protectiveness he felt for the boy. He'd known Samuel since he was a toddler, had watched him grow from a chubby-cheeked baby to the bright, curious child he was now. In many ways, Samuel reminded Ryan of himself at that age, full of questions about everything, eager to learn about horses and hunting and the ways of the wild. And Bethany. Ryan's thoughts turned to her as they rode through the moonlit forest. He had admired her from afar for years, even before Thomas died. Not that he would ever have acted on those feelings. Ryan Xavier was many things, but he wasn't the kind of man who coveted another man's wife. After Thomas's death, he'd kept his distance, knowing that Bethany was grieving and that his presence might only remind her of painful times. But he'd kept an eye on her and Samuel from afar, making sure they had enough wood for the winter, sometimes leaving a deer carcass on their porch during the leanest months. Now, riding with Samuel's trusting weight against him, Ryan allowed himself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to be part of their family. To come home to Bethany's smile and Samuel's excited chatter. To build a life together. He dismissed the thought quickly. Bethany James was a respectable widow, educated and refined despite her frontier life. And he was Ryan Xavier. A drifter, a loner, a man more at home in the wilderness than in town. A man with a past he rarely spoke of. No. Once Samuel was safely returned to his mother, Ryan would fade back into the periphery of their lives.
It was better that way.
For everyone. Dawn was breaking as they approached the Peterson mine, casting the canyon in a pale, ethereal light. Ryan dismounted a safe distance away, helping Samuel down beside him. "I need to make sure it's safe before we go in," he explained, crouching to look the boy in the eye. "Can you stay here with Thunder for a few minutes? He'll protect you." Samuel nodded solemnly. "Are they bad men in there too? Like the ones who took me?"
"Some of them, yes."
"But your mother is there, and we're going to get her out. I promise." "I knew you'd come," Samuel said with the simple faith of childhood. "Mama always says you're the bravest man in the territory." Ryan's heart gave a peculiar lurch. "Does she now?" Samuel nodded again. "She talks about you sometimes. When she thinks I'm not listening." Before Ryan could process that intriguing piece of information, a rifle shot echoed from the direction of the mine. His head snapped up, every sense suddenly alert. "Stay here," he ordered Samuel, drawing his revolver. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, or if you hear more shooting, get on Thunder and ride straight for town. Find Sheriff Miller."
"Can you remember that?"
"Yes, sir," Samuel said, eyes wide with renewed fear. Ryan squeezed the boy's shoulder reassuringly, then began making his way toward the mine, moving from cover to cover. As he neared the main building, he could hear raised voices, one of them unmistakably Bethany's. "I've done what you asked," she was saying, her voice tight with anger. "I've treated your wound. Now, let me go to my son, as you promised." "Plans have changed," a male voice replied. "Jeremiah Blackwell," Ryan guessed. "My brother sent word that there's a stranger in the area, asking questions. Until I know it's safe to move, you're staying right here." "You gave your word." Bethany's voice rose in desperation. "And I'll keep it eventually. But right now, you're more valuable to me here." Ryan edged closer to a broken window, peering inside. Bethany stood defiantly before Jeremiah Blackwell, who was seated in a chair, his bandaged shoulder clearly causing him pain despite his attempt to appear at ease. 2 other outlaws flanked him, guns at their hips. The odds weren't great, but they were better than at the camp. And with Samuel safely hidden, Ryan could take risks he wouldn't have dared otherwise. He moved to the doorway, weapon ready, and took a deep breath. Then he kicked the door open, his revolver aimed squarely at Jeremiah Blackwell's head. "Nobody move," he commanded. All heads turned toward him, expressions ranging from shock to fury. Bethany's face lit up with hope, though she quickly schooled her features to hide it from the outlaws. "Who the hell are you?" Jeremiah demanded. "The name's Ryan Xavier. I'm here for Mrs. James." One of the outlaws, Lyle, though Ryan didn't know his name, began to reach for his gun. Ryan cocked his revolver, the sound loud in the tense silence. "I wouldn't," he advised. "I'm a fair shot, and Mr. Blackwell here is in my direct line of fire. You might get me, but he'll definitely be dead." Lyle froze, looking to his boss for direction. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed as he studied Ryan. "Xavier, the tracker. I've heard of you. Then you know I don't make idle threats. Mrs. James is leaving with me. Now. And my men at the camp will kill her boy if she does," Jeremiah countered smoothly. Ryan allowed himself a small smile. "Your men at the camp are busy searching the woods for a child who isn't there anymore. Samuel James is safe, waiting for his mother." Jeremiah's face darkened with rage. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask yourself how I found this place. I tracked your men from Mrs. James's cabin all the way to your hideout. Getting Samuel out was the easy part." Bethany made a small sound, halfway between a sob and a laugh, her hand flying to her mouth. Jeremiah turned to her. "Is he telling the truth? Is this man capable of what he claims?" Bethany nodded, tears of relief shining in her eyes.
"He is.
Mr. Xavier is the best tracker in the territory. If he says my son is safe, then he is." For a long moment no one moved. Then Jeremiah Blackwell did something unexpected.
He laughed.
"Well played, Xavier. Very well played." He gestured to his men to stand down. "It seems we've reached an impasse. What do you propose?" Ryan hadn't expected this reaction, but he maintained his composure. "Mrs. James and I walk out of here. You and your men ride in the opposite direction. We never cross paths again."
"And the law?"
"Will you be leading a posse back here once the widow and her boy are safe?" "That's not my concern." "Im nolo man." Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, here you are, playing hero." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Do we have a deal or not, Blackwell?" Jeremiah considered for a moment, then nodded. "We have a deal. Mrs. James is free to go. But understand this, Xavier, if I see you again, our next meeting won't be so civilized." "Likewise," Ryan said coldly. "Mrs. James, come here." Slowly. Bethany moved to his side, her steps measured and careful. Ryan could feel her trembling as she drew near, but her head was held high, her dignity intact despite her fear. "Lyle, escort them to the canyon entrance," Jeremiah instructed. "Make sure they leave unharmed." But boss, Lyle began to protest. "Do as I say." Jeremiah cut him off. "We've got bigger problems than one tracker and a widow woman. Joshua will need to be warned." Ryan kept his gun trained on the outlaws as he and Bethany backed out of the building, followed by Lyle at a respectful distance. Once outside, Bethany whispered urgently, "Is Samuel really safe?" "Yes," Ryan assured her. "He's waiting with my horse just outside the canyon. He's tired and scared, but unharmed." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks now. "Thank God. And thank you, Ryan. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." It was the first time she had used his given name, and something warm unfurled in his chest at the sound of it on her lips. "No need for repayment. Let's just get you and Samuel home." They reached the canyon entrance without incident, Lyle watching them go with a scowl. As soon as they were out of sight around a bend in the trail, Ryan took Bethany's hand and began to run, pulling her along with him toward the place where he had left Samuel and Thunder. "Mama." Samuel's cry rang out as soon as he spotted them, and then the boy was running toward them, flinging himself into Bethany's open arms. "Samuel. Oh, my darling boy." Bethany dropped to her knees, holding her son as if she'd never let him go again, covering his face with kisses while tears streamed down her cheeks. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay, Mama," Samuel assured her, his small hands patting her cheeks. "Mr. Xavier saved me."
He was really brave.
The bad men didn't even see him coming. Bethany looked up at Ryan over Samuel's head, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper that made his heart beat faster. "He is very brave, isn't he?" Ryan cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with their admiration. "We should get moving. Blackwell might honor his word, or he might send men after us once we're gone. Either way, I'd rather not linger to find out." They mounted quickly, Samuel in front of Bethany on her mare, Ryan on Thunder, and set off at a brisk pace, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Peterson mine. By midday, Ryan was confident they weren't being pursued. They stopped by a small stream to rest the horses and eat some of the food Bethany had packed. "What will the outlaws do now?" Samuel asked, munching on a biscuit as he sat between his mother and Ryan. "They'll probably leave the territory," Ryan said.
Too many people know about them now.
"The sheriff will organize a posse once we get back to town." "Will they come after us again?" Bethany asked quietly, her hand unconsciously tightening around Samuel's shoulders. Ryan shook his head. "I don't think so. Jeremiah Blackwell is many things, but he's not foolish. He knows when he's beaten." He hesitated, then added, "Still, it might be wise for you and Samuel to stay in town for a few days, just until we're sure the gang has moved on." "We could stay with Mrs. Peterson," Samuel suggested. "She always says we're welcome anytime." Bethany smiled at her son. "That's a good idea, sweetheart." They rode on through the afternoon, the familiar landscape of rolling hills and scattered pine trees gradually giving way to the more settled farmland surrounding Wolf Creek. Samuel, exhausted from his ordeal and the long ride, fell asleep against his mother's chest, his small body going limp with the absolute trust of childhood. "He's an extraordinary boy," Ryan said softly, riding alongside them. "Brave and smart. You've done well with him, Bethany." She glanced at him, surprise and pleasure at his use of her given name evident in her expression. "Thank you. He's my whole world." "I know."
Ryan hesitated, then pressed on.
"He told me something interesting this morning. He said you talk about me sometimes." Bethany blushed, the color rising prettily in her cheeks. "Children repeat the most inconvenient things, don't they?" "Do they?" Ryan couldn't help the smile that tugged at his lips. "And what exactly do you say about me when you think he's not listening?" "Nothing of consequence," she said primly, but her eyes held a spark of mischief that Ryan had rarely seen. "Just that you're the bravest man in the territory, apparently." High praise indeed. "Well deserved, as it turns out." Her expression grew serious. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped us, Ryan. I would have gone to that mine alone, and they never would have let me or Samuel go." "You would have found a way," Ryan said with certainty. "You're stronger than you know, Bethany James." They reached Wolf Creek as the sun was setting, the town's few buildings glowing golden in the late light. News of their arrival spread quickly, and soon a small crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, where Ryan had insisted they go first. Sheriff Miller listened gravely to their account of what had happened, nodding as Ryan described the location of the outlaw camp and the confrontation at the Peterson mine. "I'll send a telegram to the marshal in Helena," he said when they had finished, "and organize a posse to check out both locations, though I reckon the Blackwell gang is long gone by now." "You should post guards at the town limits, just in case," Ryan advised. "At least for the next few days." "Already planned to," the sheriff assured him. He turned to Bethany. "Mrs. James, you and the boy are welcome to stay here in town as long as necessary. I'm sure Mrs. Peterson would be happy to have you." "Thank you, Sheriff," Bethany said, her arms still around a sleepy Samuel. "I think that would be best, at least for now." As they left the sheriff's office, Ryan found himself reluctant to part from them. The events of the past 2 days had created a bond between them that he was loath to break, but he had no claim on Bethany or Samuel, no right to insert himself further into their lives. "Well," he said awkwardly as they stood on the boardwalk outside Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, "I suppose this is where I leave you." Bethany looked at him in surprise. "You're leaving? But it's nearly dark. I've got a room at the livery stable. The owner lets me use it when I'm in town." "That's nonsense," Bethany declared firmly. "You're exhausted, Ryan. You've been riding all night and all day. You'll stay here at Mrs. Peterson's with us." Before he could protest, Samuel took his hand. "Please stay, Mr. Xavier. I want to tell you about the constellations I've been learning. Mama taught me to find the North Star." Ryan looked down at the boy's eager face, then up at Bethany's determined one, and found he couldn't refuse either of them. "All right." One night, Mrs. Peterson, a plump widow with a kind face and efficient manner, quickly arranged rooms for them, one for Bethany and Samuel, and one for Ryan across the hall. After a hearty supper, during which Samuel regaled them with a surprisingly accurate account of his rescue, embellished only slightly with details about Ryan's supposed ability to move silently like a mountain lion, the boy finally succumbed to exhaustion. "I should put him to bed," Bethany said, rising from the table. "He's practically asleep in his chair." "I can carry him up," Ryan offered, already moving to lift the drowsy child. Samuel nestled against Ryan's shoulder as they climbed the stairs, murmuring sleepily, "Are you going to be my new papa, Mr. Xavier?" Ryan nearly stumbled in shock. He glanced at Bethany, who was following behind them, and saw that she had heard the question too, her face flushing crimson. "Samuel James, what a thing to ask," she scolded gently. "Mr. Xavier is our friend. He helped us because he's kind and brave, not because—" She trailed off, clearly flustered. "But Mama, you like him," Samuel persisted, blinking owlishly. "And he likes us. Don't you, Mr. Xavier?" Ryan cleared his throat, desperately searching for an appropriate response. "I do like you and your mother very much, Samuel. But becoming someone's papa is a very serious matter. It's not something that happens overnight." This seemed to satisfy the boy, who nodded sagely before his eyes drifted shut again. Bethany hurried ahead to open the door to their room, avoiding Ryan's gaze as he laid Samuel gently on the bed. The boy was asleep almost instantly, the events of the past 2 days having utterly exhausted him. For a moment, they both stood watching him sleep, the steady rise and fall of his small chest reassuring after the dangers he had faced. Then, by silent mutual agreement, they slipped out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. In the narrow hallway, Bethany finally met Ryan's eyes. "I'm sorry about that," she said softly. "Children say the most unexpected things." "There's nothing to apologize for," Ryan assured her. "It's natural for a boy his age to want a father figure. Still, it must have made you uncomfortable." Ryan hesitated, then decided that after everything they'd been through together, honesty was the only path forward. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just surprised. Bethany studied his face in the dim light of the hall lantern. Would it be so terrible, being part of a family again? The question caught him off guard. "Again?" She nodded. "Samuel told me you said your parents died when you were young. That you were raised by your grandfather until he passed too. I didn't realize I'd shared that much with him. Children have a way of drawing out our stories," Bethany said with a small smile. "Samuel has that effect on people." Ryan leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling the weight of the past 2 days. "To answer your question, no. It wouldn't be terrible at all. But I'm not sure I'd be any good at it. Being part of a family, I mean. I think you'd be better at it than you imagine." Bethany took a step closer to him. "The way you are with Samuel. You're natural with him. Patient and kind. He adores you, you know. He's a good boy. Easy to adore right back." And his mother? Bethany asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. What about her? Ryan's heart began to pound in a way that had nothing to do with danger or exertion. His mother, he said carefully, is the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Bethany's eyes widened, a flicker of hope and uncertainty passing through them. Ryan. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her smaller ones. I've admired you from afar for years, Bethany. Even when I shouldn't have. After Thomas died, I kept my distance because I thought that was what you needed. But these past 2 days... He trailed off, searching for the right words. These past 2 days have changed things, Bethany finished for him. For both of us, I think. Ryan nodded. They have. But I need you to be sure. You and Samuel have been through a terrible ordeal. I wouldn't want you to make any decisions based on gratitude or relief. Bethany stepped closer still, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her hair. It's not gratitude, Ryan. At least, not only gratitude. She placed her free hand lightly on his chest, above his heart. When Samuel was taken, you were the first person I thought of. The only person I knew would help without question, without hesitation. That means something, doesn't it? It means you trust me, Ryan said, his voice rougher than he intended.
Yes.
But it's more than that. Bethany took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. I care for you, Ryan Xavier. I have for some time now. And if you feel the same. Ryan couldn't remember the last time he'd felt such a surge of joy and terror simultaneously. I do, he said simply. I care for you more than I can say, Bethany James. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he bent his head toward hers. Bethany rose on tiptoes to meet him, her lips soft and yielding against his in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally parted, Bethany's eyes were shining in the lamplight. Stay, she whispered. Not just tonight, but...
Stay.
With us. Are you sure? It won't be easy. People will talk. Let them, Bethany said with newfound fierceness. After what we've just lived through, gossip seems a small price to pay for happiness. Ryan cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the turn his life had taken in just 2 days. Then I'll stay, for as long as you and Samuel want me. That might be a very long time, Bethany warned, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'm counting on it, Ryan replied, drawing her close once more. The Blackwell gang, true to Ryan's prediction, fled the territory, though not before the law caught up with 2 of their members, including Lyle. From them, Sheriff Miller learned that Jeremiah and Joshua Blackwell, along with Red Rose and the remaining gang members, had headed north toward Canada. For a time, Bethany and Samuel stayed in town, just to be safe. Ryan moved his few possessions into Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, taking meals with them and spending his days helping Sheriff Miller organize patrols and strengthen the town's defenses. In the evenings, he would sit with Bethany on Mrs. Peterson's porch, talking long into the night about their pasts, their hopes, their dreams for the future. He told her about his years as a cavalry scout, about the tracking skills his grandfather had taught him, about his dream of someday breeding horses on a ranch of his own. She shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her journey west with Thomas, the challenges and joys of frontier life. And Samuel, delighted to have Ryan's constant presence, bombarded him with questions about everything from how to track deer to why the stars stayed in the same patterns night after night. Ryan answered each question with patience and often humor, his affection for the boy growing with each passing day. By the time a month had passed with no sign of the Blackwell gang returning, Bethany decided it was safe to return to her farm. Ryan rode out with them, helping to repair the damage the outlaws had done to the cabin and chopping enough firewood to last well into winter. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, Ryan finally gathered his courage. "Bethany," he began, taking her hand in his, "I know it hasn't been very long since. Well, since everything changed between us. And if you think it's too soon, I'll understand completely." Bethany turned to him, her expression curious. "Too soon for what, Ryan?" Instead of answering directly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Carefully unfolding it, he revealed a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice husky with emotion. "The only thing of hers I have left. My grandfather saved it for me, said I should give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." He took a deep breath. "I want that woman to be you, Bethany. If you'll have me." Bethany's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ryan Xavier?" "I am. I love you, Bethany. And I love Samuel, as if he were my own son. I want us to be a family officially, properly. And what about your wandering ways?" She teased gently, though her eyes were serious. "A wife and child would certainly tie you down." "I've done enough wandering," Ryan said with certainty. "It's time I put down roots. With you and Samuel, if you'll have me." Bethany's answer was to throw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him backward in her enthusiasm. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll have you, Ryan Xavier." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Wolf Creek, with Samuel proudly standing as Ryan's best man, clutching the rings with solemn importance. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward, the recent troubles with the Blackwell gang having made Bethany and Ryan something of local heroes. Sheriff Miller, who had performed the ceremony in his capacity as Justice of the Peace, raised a toast to the couple at the reception held in Mrs. Peterson's spacious garden. "To Ryan and Bethany Xavier," he proclaimed. "Proof that even in our wild corner of the world, love and courage can conquer the darkest dangers." As the guests cheered and clinked glasses, Ryan leaned down to whisper in his new wife's ear, "Are you happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Bethany looked up at him, her eyes shining with joy. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him, standing on tiptoes to kiss him lightly. "And you?" Ryan glanced across the garden to where Samuel was proudly showing his friends the new pocket knife Ryan had given him as a wedding gift. "I never knew a man could be this happy," he admitted. "I thought I was content with my solitary life, but now I can't imagine going back to it." "You'll never have to," Bethany promised, nestling against his side. "You're stuck with us now, for better or worse." "Definitely for better," Ryan said, wrapping his arm around her waist. That night, after Samuel had been tucked into bed in his room at Mrs. Peterson's, where they would stay until returning to the farm the next day, Ryan and Bethany retired to their own room, finally alone as husband and wife. Later, as Bethany lay in his arms, her head resting on his chest, she traced idle patterns on his skin. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you all those years ago? That I was the most handsome man you'd ever laid eyes on?" Ryan suggested with a grin. Bethany laughed softly. "Well, yes, there was that. But mostly I thought you looked
free.
Like you answered to no one but yourself and the wind. I envied that in a way." "And now?" Ryan asked, suddenly serious. "Do you feel like I've taken that freedom from you?" "No," Bethany said without hesitation. "I feel like we've found a different kind of freedom together. The freedom to be ourselves, to love without fear, to build something lasting." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Does that make sense?" Ryan kissed her gently. "Perfect sense. It's exactly how I feel." The years that followed were good ones for the Xavier family. Ryan's knowledge of horses proved valuable, and he gradually transformed the struggling farm into a prosperous horse ranch. Bethany's skills as a healer brought people from neighboring communities seeking her remedies, and she eventually opened a small apothecary in town, riding in 3 days a week to tend to patients. Samuel grew tall and strong, with his mother's kindness and his adoptive father's affinity for horses and the wilderness. By the time he was 12, he could track almost as well as Ryan and knew the properties of every healing herb in Bethany's garden. And there were other children too, twin girls, Rose and Rachel, born a year after the wedding, and a son, Thomas Ryan, who arrived 2 years later. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Ryan adding rooms each time Bethany announced another child was on the way. The Blackwell gang passed into local legend, their brief reign of terror becoming a cautionary tale told to remind people of the importance of community and vigilance. Occasionally, news would reach Wolf Creek of their exploits farther north, but they never returned to Montana territory. 10 years to the day after Samuel's rescue, the Xavier family held a special celebration. They invited the whole town to a barbecue at their ranch, which had become one of the most successful in the region. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and as the sun began to set, Ryan stood on the porch of their now spacious home, arm around his wife's waist, watching their children play with their friends. 10 years, Bethany marveled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Sometimes it seems like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Ryan nodded, his eyes finding Samuel among the crowd, 16 now, tall and handsome, with a girl from town looking admiringly up at him as they talked. In a way, it was another lifetime. For all of us. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if they hadn't taken him? Bethany asked. If we'd just gone on as we were, you stopping by occasionally, me too stubborn to admit my feelings? Ryan chuckled. Knowing you, and knowing myself, I suspect we'd have figured it out eventually. Though perhaps not quite so dramatically. Bethany smiled up at him. I'm glad we didn't wait. These 10 years have been the happiest of my life. Mine too, Ryan said with simple sincerity. And we've got many more ahead of us. Promise? Bethany asked, a hint of the old vulnerability in her eyes. Ryan kissed her tenderly. I promise. After all, I rode through the night for this family once. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I know you would, Bethany said, her voice full of love and certainty. That's why I fell in love with you, Ryan Xavier. And why I fall in love with you all over again, every single day. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created from danger and fear and hope. And if anyone had asked them, in that moment, if they would change anything about the path that had brought them together, they would have answered with one voice, not a single step. For in the wilds of Montana territory, a brave woman and a lone cowboy had found not just love, but family, home, and a happiness neither had dared to imagine. And that, perhaps, was the greatest adventure of all.